It's actually a great honor to speak at my first social science seminar. I'm a chemist, but I have been interested in diversity issues, and I thought I would speak more about diversity beyond gender equality, for the simple reason that, we have a room full of experts on just gender equality. So I'm going to speak about some recent findings, particularly from Norway. And probably many of you are already very familiar with these findings, but my personal experience, at least among my friends, is that a lot of these recent findings are not so well known. And so diversity beyond gender equality, of course, you have race, physical handicap, sexual orientation, language, culture, and various combinations of these. And for this audience, I don't need to explain why diversity is important for all these reasons. And of course, it's important for just fundamental fairness. And in particular, one of the things I've looked at is for LGBTQ people. And here is an issue I edited recently in a certain area of chemistry and with LGBT authors, including many, including several from the less common, shall we say, groups like intersex, agender, pansexual, and non-binary groups. Okay. So here is a map which has been put out this year by an organization called Rainbow Europe. It's a part of this particular LGBT organization in Europe, and they rate different countries by various criteria, equality and non-discrimination, legal gender recognition, and so forth, going to aspects of family law and asylum law and so forth. And you can see that all the Nordic countries are at the very top, as also France and I think it's Belgium and the Iberian countries are doing very well here. Now, that of course doesn't mean that everything is okay. So there is always room for improvement pretty much everywhere. And here are some recent findings about LGBTQ plus people. And these are recent headlines. For example, here is, they're all from the last couple of years. Here, for example, is a headline that says 1 in 4 LGBT people in Norway experience agitation is not quite the word. This is a Google Translate, but some form of harassment. And compared to heterosexual people, the rate of harassment is about 4 times, so quite a bit. Threatened and provoked, harassed rather, 4 times as often. Okay, intersectional and non-binary people face extra discrimination. It's intersex, transgender, and some less common categories such as asexual, bisexual, pansexual. Well, bisexual is not really uncommon, but some of the other ones. And especially queer immigrants and minorities. To some extent, these people face discrimination from their own families at some point, but also from the larger community at large. And so these are particularly vulnerable groups. Then there is also, moving on to racism. So what does the recent literature say about racism? And basically, there is, I think, most of us who belong to one of the other races, shall we say, find it perfectly okay to work, but okay doesn't mean perfect. And this gentleman, his name is Arnfinn Midtbø, he has done some very rigorous quantitative studies, and his findings are that, yes, there is substantial discrimination in the workplace, and he finds that the discrimination in terms of workplace, jobs, it's on the order of what's experienced by minorities in France and the Netherlands, and also by African Americans in America. That said, of course, we don't have cases like George Floyd here. So there is a difference, but more subtle forms of discrimination does happen, rather. Then there is, I'm sorry, this is in Norwegian, and I could not get Google Translate to translate it. Here, everyday racism. So structural racism in a structurally inclusive welfare state. That's what it says. And essentially, here is quite a remarkable finding. What it says is that, yes, immigrants and minorities experience racism, but it doesn't necessarily hold them back economically. Instead, many immigrants and minorities get perfectly good jobs, but they sort of live with negative comments and negative experiences while in those jobs. It hasn't held them back, but they live in a poorer work environment. And once again, the level of the number of people who experience this kind of everyday racism is on the order of 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people. And so I should say that I'm bringing it up because I have experienced some of it myself. So I've written a bit about it here on Academia and Diversity. You can look it up. If you Google my name, Abhik Ghosh, and racism, you'll find this article. And it's, of course, extremely embarrassing to write such an article. But what are some of the findings? I've talked with a large number of people at our faculty, the Science and Technology faculty, and the general finding seems to be that minorities are held to stricter rules and standards. Then there are exclusionary behaviors and practices. Minorities are not included in committees, grants, awards, society memberships, etc. And then there is also outright discrimination and harassment. And sadly, I have experienced some of that, and quite a bit of it, which is why I'm mentioning it. But the good part is I have spoken about it to at least 3 high-ranking administrators at this university. And I must say that each of them was the very model of professionalism. And that is more than you can say about most countries, I would think. Probably in most places they would try to, shove it under the rug and so forth. So the thing that I find is these negative experiences originate from one or two bad apples, let's put it that way. But the general environment is quite good, and we have good mechanisms in place to tackle these. But one of the problems, of course, is the victims are often unaware of these mechanisms and don't feel comfortable invoking them. Okay, so all this talk of minorities and LGBT and so forth, especially minorities, is happening against a backdrop of a tremendous shortage of native Norwegian manpower in the STEM fields, especially. So 50% of Norwegian doctorates are awarded to foreigners, and 1/3 of Norway's researchers are foreign. So we have a veritable Tower of Babel. And under these circumstances, you can ask, should we worry about minorities? Should we worry about these things? Should we not focus wholeheartedly on attracting natives? And the answer is you can't have one without the other. I mean, these people, these foreigners, are responsible for teaching our kids, Norwegians who live here. And it's important that they are included in society and so forth. And also, if you look at it another way, Norway is the size of a medium-sized city, like, say, Boston or San Diego or some other similar-sized city in the US. And no one would expect that, anyone who goes to a university in Boston would meet only Bostonians among their fellow students. So perhaps it's not so bad, but I think there is some scope for concern. And of course, we are all working to fix this. Here, this is Kurt Rice. He was vice rector here, and I think he is now a rector at another university. What he is saying here is his article, "A diverse academia is a good academia," but that's not the point. It's the subtext here which is important. And here he says that very soon we will have a tremendous shortage of qualified personnel for the associate professor and full professor ranks. And that is already the case in my field, chemistry, and probably most STEM fields. And finally, I want to bring up another element of diversity, or lack of diversity rather, and that is inbreeding. Inbreeding, this is an article from 2022. It's all you want to know about academic inbreeding, or okay, this is from 2021, but all kinds of aspects of it. But the general finding is that academic inbreeding is detrimental to research aspirations, innovativeness, risk-taking, and multidisciplinary engagement of academics' research agendas. Now, Norway is a small country. You are always going to have some degree of inbreeding. And the question is, how much is appropriate? That said, Norway is not Iceland. There are 5-6 major universities, and there is substantial scope for circulation among these universities. It also varies depending on the field. If in the social sciences, it may be more acceptable. In the STEM fields like physics or chemistry, which are more international, it's probably less good or less acceptable. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing at my department is that we are about 50% inbred, that is not counting postdocs. So we have hired 50% of our own PhDs. And I personally think that's too high, far too high, in fact. So what I seem to detect is that lack of international standards in publications, poor citation rates, absence from international fora such as conferences, and lack of competitiveness in grant applications. These are some of the pitfalls of inbreeding. And what I wanted to mention is that this is an element of diversity that we often don't speak about. But after all, from an institutional point of view, diversity is not really about, well, it is, but let's say it's less importantly about race and gender and so on, but it's above all about ideas and viewpoints. And if we hire largely our own alumni, you are sacrificing a diversity of viewpoints and so on. So on that note, I think I will conclude, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.